Hi, this is Greg Kilstrom. Welcome to Season 3 of the Agile World, where we discuss customer and employee experience, organizational and workforce transformation, and how business can adapt and continually improve in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed in this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles, or get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kilstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile World podcast. Today we're going to talk about how marketers can embrace Agile principles to be more successful in their work. While Agile has a number of applications, marketers are uniquely suited to benefit from it. We're going to talk about the value of experimentation, having patience to measure results, and the power of continuous incremental improvement. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Steve Moubray, Enterprise Agile Coach. First, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background and what you do now?
Hey, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
As Greg mentioned, I am an enterprise agile coach, and what that means is I help organizations implement business agility across the org. I've been working with a variety of different customers for the last few years. I stumbled across agility practices a decade ago when I was coming off of a long waterfall style project, and I realized this was not the best way to do things. And I discovered agility was kind of how I was running a marketing business that I had for a decade before. But I didn't know that there was all these practices around it. So the whole concepts of agile and business agility came very natural for me.
That's great. Well, yeah, and since that point, you've built some great experience working with teams, building agile practices within organizations. So, for the audience, I know I talk a lot about agile in various ways. Some more strict methodology, and some more broad in the broader sense of the term. But for the audience, how would you define the guiding principles of agile?
Okay, that's a almost a loaded question, as you know, Greg, because people tend to dig in on their certain frameworks and so forth. But
Yeah.
the Agile Manifesto was written 20 years ago, and we're celebrating its anniversary. In fact, a20dmv.org, we just had a big event, a 3-day event where we were celebrating the signing of the Agile Manifesto. And for something to last 20 years, it has to be pretty powerful. And the reality of it is, when it was written, it was written by a bunch of techies. They were all software developers trying to find better ways to develop software. And it was written at a time to solve a problem of the market, and the technology was changing faster than business processes allowed. So by the time you planned a project, by the time that you got budgeting for a project and launched it, things had changed so much that your project was no longer valid even before you got the product into market. And this was 20 years ago. So there was no Facebook. Cell phones in America could not connect to the internet, and video conferencing was completely impossible. So think about how much faster things change today.
Yeah.
So really the core values, there's 4 values and 12 principles. The core values are really focused on the ability to respond to change rapidly. And through that, you want to make sure that you focus on experimenting, learning, and responding to what you've just learned, and go forward. So as long as you take the technical principles that are applied and think about it from the mindset of we don't know what we don't know yet. So let's do some experiments, let's test the waters, let's learn, and then let's adapt to whatever the new changes are. That's going to bring you an agile mindset. That's going to bring business agility to your organization.
That's great. No, that's a really good. I think that's a really good summary. And while there's a lot of different applications, I mean, I think we've seen Agile applied to many different facets of a business. I know it had its roots in manufacturing and software development, but really, we've seen it applied in many different ways. Today, we're going to focus a little bit more on the marketing aspect. That's certainly something that a good deal of my audience is involved in. Certainly, I've a good share of experience there as well. What do you think? When you think of this agile mindset and agile approach, why do you think it's can be so beneficial to marketers?
Oh, I think that's a great question. And the reality of it is, I think it can be valuable to pretty much anything that doesn't become a repetitive process. And by that I mean, if you build a house and you build 100 houses and they're all identical, well, you probably nailed it. You probably figured out the best way to do it. But anything else, you just don't know. So when you think about marketing, marketing is really based on how people outside of your tribe respond to your communications, right? So you can't predict that. You don't know. Now, if you have lots of experience, certainly your first estimate, your first guess, your first try is going to be closer than someone with no experience, but
Yeah,
you just don't know. So, Greg, you and I are talking right now, and I could sell you something. Um, we're in the sales cycle, but
right.
if we're trying to market, we're trying to reach people that we don't know, that we're not having one-on-one communication with, and we just don't know how they're going to respond to whatever we create. So through that, you're constantly polling, you're constantly learning, and hopefully you're constantly adjusting and responding to the new information. So um, so having an agile mindset is almost inherently practical, and I think most successful marketing campaigns and most successful marketing organizations have already been embracing that. They just may not have a complete framework around it. And I
Yeah.
think just identifying it as business agility, as marketing agility, or creating a nomenclature around it so you can discuss it in a vocabulary, I think can be very very powerful. But I think people are already doing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of marketers, even for quite a while, they've been engaging in agile practices, and yeah, and but not calling it such, and therefore I think you make a great point. Is when you can name something and when you can put a vocabulary to it, then you can be more methodical about it, right? And I think that's the benefit. It's not that there's one solution to all of our problems, which is agile. It's that agile is actually a great solution to a lot of problems because it helps give a framework to things like experimentation, and how you do that and how you do it the right way versus not being not being so scientific about it. Can you talk a little bit about that process, and creating hypothesis, testing it, and all that, and just how marketers might think about that in a little bit more structured way?
That's another great point. And the creation of an hypothesis statement, I think, is a brilliant step. And the reason we call it a hypothesis is just because we don't know. We're going to test something, and we're going to check our results and see if we proved or disproved our hypothesis. Right? If you go back to school and think about the
Yeah,
scientific method, and the idea of creating a true hypothesis statement is so powerful because it aligns everybody. It aligns the teams, it aligns the stakeholders, and it provides focus on the goals. And if you can create it in such a way that you can use it as a speakable elevator pitch, and we write
yeah,
one way, we speak in another. So we have to be careful, and we always want the hypothesis statement to be something that we can speak about. It just brings a lot of alignment and clarity. Now, in order to do that, you have to make it short. You have to use language that people normally use, and you have to describe what you're doing, why you're doing it, what are the expected outcomes, and most importantly, how we will know if we're achieving our goals. And those are the leading indicators. And with indicators, we have leading indicators and lagging indicators. And the leading indicators are going to tell us, are we on track? Are we headed in the right direction? Before we get our final results, are we in the process of achieving that? And our lagging indicators are going to tell us, hey, you know what? We did worked well or didn't work well, but it's in the
yeah,
past and there's not much we can do. So, and I did put together while we were talking this morning, just a quick example of it. And so what we might do is A typical hypothesis statement might come out like, for our marketing group who spends 3 to 9 months getting budget approval, the agile transformation is a new way of working that will provide the ability for us to launch new initiatives in a matter of weeks, unlike our current process, which requires 10 to 20 page business cases that may be reviewed 7 to 12 times.
Yeah.
Our solution creates guardrails and empowers our marketing teams to do what's best in a quick and rapid fashion.
Nice. That's
So,
great. Yeah.
and then we could put some indicators around that. The outcomes are we want to be able to respond much faster to our customers, right? So we can gain more customers, so we can keep our customers longer. And some of the ways we might measure that is we will launch 2 initiatives in 3 to 6 months, and we will have results or testing within 6 to 9 months or 3 to 6 months after launching those, so we can have very quick responses. That way, we know that we are headed on track or we're not. So, does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I mean, I do think giving structure, but also giving the metrics to understand, because I think the caveat in my mind to this, and I've written and talked about this a bit as well, is we collect all this data, we put these processes in place, and then I think that there's been a misconception about, when you talk about agility and not agile methodology, but when you talk about being adaptive and agile and stuff, there could be a tendency to be reactive. So, big data is amazing because it allowed us to start storing all this stuff. And then, we had the machines that were able to parse that and give us access to real time data and insights and everything. But the downside to all of that is being over, like, reactionary, right? And doing something just because the campaign failed yesterday, or looks like it's failing, on within the first 12 hours of launch, let's say, from a marketing perspective, doesn't necessarily mean we scrap all of the planning and scrap our methodology and our process and everything. So how do you how do you guard against that? I mean, to me, I see agile as being a way to do that, just broadly speaking. But how do you guard against reactionism, when you have access to all these insights and when you put these KPIs in place, and so on and so forth?
Ah, yes, yes. Well, you definitely have to find the right balance,
Yeah,
because as you know, people can react very, very quickly. Um, and I think having a clear hypothesis statement is so important to help avoid that, because it should align everybody on what are the goals. Okay, if our real goals or true goals are making sure that we get 200,000 new customers or new likes or new email addresses in the next 6 weeks, then
yeah,
that's what we want to focus on. And we can't tell in 12 hours, as you mentioned. So we really have to focus on what are the true outcomes and what are the leading indicators that we created. And if our leading indicators say within 3 weeks this is what we should have, then 3 weeks. Wait
yeah,
wait 3 weeks and test the waters, and check the data. And we also need to adjust things a little bit. We You used the term react a couple of times there, and when I think of reacting to something, I think of being more emotional,
yeah,
um, reactionary. And I think what we really want to do is we really want to help organizations and people respond. So we have a reaction, and our initial reaction is, "Oh shit, what the heck
right,
just happened?" Right? "Oh no, we're failing." But then absorb that. Go ahead and react to that all you want, but absorb that for a minute. Calm down and think about how you should respond to that. Go back to what are your leading indicators? What are the goals? And take in all of the information, not just that "oh shit" moment, but really wrap your head around it. And then, if we go about responding and we think about responding, we can be more thoughtful in our response and in our changes and adaptation. And this is also a very important thing: is establish some type of cadence. And establishing a regular cadence, um, in our campaigns. One of the things that software teams do, Scrum teams do, is they'll set up a sprint cadence. Many of you may have heard the term
Yeah.
sprint, and that's normally like a 2 week cadence. It might be 1 week or 4 weeks, but it's generally 2 weeks. And at the end of 2 weeks, that's when we inspect and adapt. And for those 2 weeks, we deliver. We don't change. We deliver what we said we were going to do. We meet our commitment, regardless of what happens, because 2 weeks is not that long. And
Right.
it's if we do something wrong for 2 weeks, at least we completed something, and at the end of it, we have something that's complete, not reactionary, not changing, not vague, and that's something that we can measure. We can respond to it, and we can make good decisions. And if we do it any shorter, we may not. So figure out whatever your cadence is, set that, and just make sure that you follow it.
Yeah. So, one of the other things that I believe is agile works best when it's embraced at the let's say from the top down, from the bottom up, however you want to say it. It's embraced organization wide. There are plenty of organizations though where there's agile. Maybe the software engineering team has embraced it, a decade ago or so, and maybe marketing is starting to embrace it now, but executive leadership doesn't necessarily understand it or have wrapped their heads around it, so on and so forth. The challenge there is, marketing is going along and doing the right thing and being scientific and methodical about things. But the shareholders and the board and the rest of the exec team are like, hey, we need results today. How do you recommend that? Let's say a chief marketing officer in this case, communicates that to the rest of leadership and really, tries to get some buy-in from the rest of the org when agile is not just a given within the organization.
That's a fascinating question, because normally what we see are organizations are afraid to spend money, and they want to plan out everything to the nth degree, and then by the time that they've done all that planning and figured out what the return on investment is, they're still wrong because
Right.
it's still a hypothesis. They've just
Right.
spent months and months and months on it and
It's a
tons of
longer,
time
more
on it.
expensive hypothesis. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not any more accurate. In fact, it's usually less accurate. So the great thing about agility is you can start doing sooner, and so you can deliver something. It may not be the big, huge, big bang that you were thinking of, but you still have to get to that big bang, right? So
Right.
if you start doing sooner, you can learn almost immediately, especially with marketing campaigns and some of the immediate feedback you can get. And so agility is the way that you build up to your big bang, up to your big results, as opposed to planning, launching something big, and then expecting big results. You can use agility to do your incremental builds, and as you're doing that, keep leading up to the big ones. Now, there's a couple of terms that we use, minimum viable product, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with, MMF, which is minimum marketable feature, and minimum marketable release. And so as you're doing those, you build up. So the first thing you do is focus on MVP. What's the smallest thing that we can do to learn? We think we're going to do this big campaign, but before we launch this big campaign, we're going to do this small little test. And as we're doing this small little test, we're going to be planning the rest of it. But we're going to go ahead and get something out there in front of people. We're going to get some early adopters. We're going to get some early feedback. That way, our MMF, our minimum marketable feature, or the next phase, what we're actually going to put out there in the market, is going to be closer, and then we're going to get to the final release or the final launch of the big thing. And by the time we launch that big thing, instead of just talking about it and planning about it, we already have a couple of our MVP cycles. We already have a couple of our MMF cycles.
Yeah.
So we've learned as we go, and that's how we're understanding. We're not sitting in a room talking about, gee, what do we think is going to be the best thing to do? We've just tested a couple of things. So it doesn't take any
Yeah.
longer to launch a big project using agility and using incremental approach. It just gets you closer, and your final delivery is going to be much closer to what you really want. Did that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. It does. It does. And I think having um, let's say smaller increments between measurements should be something that, let's say, the skeptics or those that are looking for quicker results, I mean, they should, again, it's a should, not a necessarily always in reality, but those leaders and those in the organization should actually be more comfortable with being able to see better data more quickly, right? So I do think that's it seems like more organizations are moving in this direction, but there's always those laggards that are just kind of a little behind the times and used to things being a certain way, right?
Yeah, yeah, and you can just build up on that. So you don't have to be any slower in your incremental approach. It's just by the time that you launch your big, huge campaign, you've done some tests along the way.
Yeah,
Um, and that
yeah.
that's you can still have the same big bang launch date if you want.
Yeah, and I think that's another one of those. I mean, having run a marketing agency, being hired to do campaigns and all that, it's the, I guess, the disappointment factor in, oh well, we don't, to your point, yes, you can still do a big launch date or whatever, but I think the trend in more agile marketing is less of, okay, let's put all our dollars in a Super Bowl ad, just to use an extreme example, but instead let's be a little more methodical. And it's in a sense, it's a slower, more incremental rollout, which is less, I mean, let's just say, it's less sexy to have a rollout that actually goes over 8 months and ramps up, considerably throughout that process, than a big launch on day one and we scrapped everything and started over. And it's, again, that's very dramatic, and there's a nice reveal party or whatever for it. But to your other points, that may fail miserably because it's a hypothesis, and at best it's one that maybe it took longer to plan, but just because it took longer to plan doesn't mean it's going to be more effective. So it takes the wind out of some of the the drama, I guess, of marketing or whatever, but it should breed better results, right?
Yeah, absolutely, it should, and maybe you can find some test markets, or yeah, yeah, for the
Yeah.
big Super Bowl reveal, I could understand that.
Right, right. Yeah, and that, again, I think it's a natural evolution, and not those big reveals are not necessarily, they're not always effective, especially in an age of social media, where if the audience doesn't like it and it's a big reveal, then it's actually way more detrimental than, to your point, rolling out in a few markets and finding that you just inadvertently launch something that was going to be, whether it's controversial or just simply ineffective. Either way, doing it in a smaller way is going to be better long term.
Yeah, or maybe doing a little bit of testing, so when you do your big reveal, it's closer. And maybe
Right,
it's a
right.
maybe it's a big reveal to 98% of the country as opposed to 100.
Right, right. So let's talk a little bit about the teams that are working on projects in an agile way. So the process of completing things. It's often easy to get caught up in percent completes of individual tasks and things like that. But how do you work with teams to mitigate against that? I'm X percent complete with something, and as opposed to keeping an eye on the bigger picture and stuff like that.
Uh, such a huge challenge. I love that question because, yeah, we always go through that. I hate reporting. What percentage done are you? Like, I have
Right.
no idea. It's not done, right? So until it's done, we don't know, right? Uh,
Yeah.
so one of the things that we like to focus on with agility is the only way you can show progress is by delivering something. You have to have something to show, right? Whether some type of product. So you have to have some type of copy. You have to have some type of software. You have to have some type of delivery. You have to have tested something. You have to be able to show something. Um, and the whole 80% done. I've seen projects that are 80% done for years. So so they
Yeah.
never get they
Yeah.
never get over that hump. And I think this is one of the reasons why Scrum is such a popular methodology for new agile teams, because it identifies things. It says, hey, we start on a particular day, and then 2 weeks later we finish whatever we start, we finish in those 2 weeks. And with that,
Yeah.
that helps people get the mindset of it's more important to start finishing than it is to start a whole bunch of things, and to get a whole bunch of things halfway done. It's better to have something complete. And when you have something complete, you can take a look at it, you can touch it, feel it, and you know that that's done. Now, you may have to have, there may be the question of, do we need 50 of these things or do we need 100 of these things? And
Right.
that becomes a different issue, but at least you know you have something complete, something finished. You can see it, touch it, feel it. So with a marketing campaign, I would say no. There is no 80% done in copy. We have something that is written, documented, designed, and approved by the customer, and it's either done or it's not. And if you have it, if so, that forces you to break down the work into small pieces. So maybe you break up the copy into 3 or 4 different tasks or 3 or 4 different things, and each time one of those gets done, you start getting closer to your completion. And with that,
Yeah.
you also want to make sure that you focus very intently on the flow, and you want to focus on the flow of value. A lot of Scrum teams, when they first start off, or a lot of Agile teams, when they start working on their short little cycles, is they'll start a bunch of stuff and nothing gets done. And
Mm.
they get to the end of whatever their cadence is, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and nothing is completed or everything's in disarray. So you want to make sure that you don't have the team starting too much stuff, and you want to visualize that, and we can talk about other various ways to do that. But you want to make sure that the team is focusing on what's important and completing stuff. Stuff has to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I know there's some ways of you mentioned, there's some ways of trying to figure out how you don't take on too much and everything. I mean, so I've seen things like assigning points to like in software development, assigning points to features and stuff like that. How is that a way, like for marketing teams, like how might they look into not overcommitting, I guess?
That's always a challenge until the team has spent some time together.
Yeah.
And once the team spends some time together, you can start figuring out that. But I think the most important thing for a team to do is to. I'm a big fan of Kanban boards. I don't know if you're familiar with what a Kanban board
Yeah.
is or what it looks like, but I'm a big fan of them. And even with Scrum teams, so well, Scrum's not coming, but just so you can take a look at it. And the advantage of having a good Kanban board is you can see how much work is in process. So if we have a team and I look at a Kanban board and I see that there's 8 things in flight, 8 things in a particular state of undone, and I know there's 4 people on the team, I know they're going to fail. I don't need
Yeah.
to look any further. I can just look at that board and see exactly. You have 8 things that the team is working on. You have 4 people. It's not going to happen. So if we, so if the team start visualizing their work and they say, hey, we're a team of 4 people, and we think we can do. We have 2 people that are good with graphics and 2 people that are good with text, and that's what we're going to do. And we look at what's in the graphics state, and we have 8 things in graphics. Well, that's not going to happen. So we want 1 or 2 things there because we have 2 people. Get those done, and then focus on the next. What's the next
Yeah.
step? If we have to write copy around it, what's that? If we have to get things posted on social media and gather our statistics, then how many people are doing that? How many of those do we have in flight? And really focus on getting things done from beginning to end, because to complete a single task, you might have to go through 5 or 6 different steps, might have to go through five or
Yeah.
six different hands, and make sure that you can visualize that and really focus on that area first. Then you can focus on, how much can you get through the system, but first make sure the system is working for you.
Great, great. Well, one last question before we wrap up. We talked about a lot of different things today, and a lot of different aspects of agile that marketing folks can potentially apply. How do you recommend that somebody gets started and learns more about Agile, particularly if they're in marketing or a related discipline?
I think that is a great question. And, um, one place to start is there are a plethora of good books out there. I know there's one guy named Greg Kilstrom who's written a couple books on agile marketing that are
I've
all
heard of
good.
him.
Yeah, yeah. And what I love about the books is they're generally under 200 pages. And I say that because we can only absorb so much, right? We all have
Yeah.
information overload. One of the first books I read on agility was on just on writing requirements, and it was over 500 pages. It was painful. I hated
Yeah.
it, and so I really look for books in the 100 to 200 page market. And one of the things that I've also discovered is as we're focusing more and more on mindset the last 5 years, there's a lot more. Um, there's a lot more books that I think are valuable than there used to be. So one, your books I think are great. There's another one called Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette, which focuses specifically on mindset. And it's great. It's how he takes a nuclear submarine and applies agility and team empowerment. There's also others by people like Marty Kagan, Melissa Perry. They've written some good books. So there are a plethora of good books that are under a couple hundred pages that you can digest in a relatively short amount of time. Also, I did mention that we just had a conference. There was a 3-day conference at A20 DMV. That's Agile. The 20 stands for the 20th anniversary, and DMV stands for District Maryland Virginia .org. We took all of the presentations; those are all recorded. So there's 3 days worth of recordings there. I also reached out to a number of people and got lightning talks. And a lightning talk is, anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes. So we have a couple dozen of those on there. So if you have, 10 minutes,
Great.
coffee break, it's a good place to go. Also, there's an organization called IC Agile. And IC Agile, yes, they're like many of the other organizations. They sell certificates as that's their business model. That's what they do. However, IC Agile has taken a slightly different approach, and they're really focusing on things that the market needs, not just here's the single methodology. Come learn this methodology, and we're going to sell you this methodology. They really have a big focus, and they've recently launched an agile marketing um, course. So I haven't taken it yet,
Oh, nice.
but it's fairly new, but I think it might be of value. So that's IC Agile, not it's just two letters, I and C,
Yeah.
Agile, and so that could be very good. Now, when you do choose a course, make sure you do some research on the instructor, because some instructors do nothing but teach, and you may not get as much value from someone like that as opposed to someone who has been delivering, who has worked in the industry, and who has authored books or has some skin in the game and has learned from practice. So be careful when you choose a instructor. And then there's also the Business Agility Institute, which could be a very helpful place. And um, and then there's a group in Atlanta called Product Coffee. Now I don't know if you've ever attended a lean coffee, Greg, but it's just a group of people to get together for a cup of coffee and they chat about a variety of things. Now they are mostly focused on product management, but a lot of the product management pieces are in how do you make sure you're developing the right thing and how do you market. So it can be very powerful. They're on Eventbrite. They meet at 7:30 a.m. Atlanta time, and it's a pretty good group. I've attended a few of those. They're fairly new, and there's some good information there as well. So I think those are all good places to start.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of great resources there. Well, Steve, thanks so much for joining the show. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with you and what you're doing?
Oh, probably LinkedIn. It's Steve Moubray. That's Moubray. LinkedIn is I'm on there quite a bit, as well as go to a20dmv.org and see what we've just put out there. But yeah, touching base and following Greg, of course, is following you is great. And yeah, I'm happy to respond and reach out to anybody.
Great. Well, again, I'd like to thank Steve Moubray for joining the show. Thanks for listening to the Agile World with Greg Kihlstrom. See you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, from my website at theagile.world.